The first gunshot sent a flock of birds scattering into the pale Montana sky as Mabel Morrison limped behind the mercantile, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't the gunfight in the dusty street that frightened her. Those were common enough in Silver Creek in 1876, but the letter clutched in her trembling hand. Marry me or lose the ranch. The ultimatum from Bernard Holcomb, the banker who held her father's mortgage, made her stomach twist with dread. Since Pa's passing last winter, she'd managed to keep their small ranch afloat, but the drought had withered their hopes along with the pastures. With her pronounced limp, a reminder of the childhood fever that had nearly claimed her life, most men in town viewed her as damaged goods, unlikely to marry. Holcomb knew this, and was using it against her. Mabel smoothed her faded calico skirt, tucked a wayward strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, and forced herself to breathe. At 22, she'd learned to endure the stares, the whispers, the pity. But losing Riverbend Ranch, the only home she'd ever known, was unthinkable. As the gunfire ceased, she peered cautiously around the corner of the building. A tall figure strode through the settling dust, his shoulders broad beneath a worn leather vest. Owen Lattimer, the new ranch hand at the neighboring double circle spread, was helping the sheriff drag an unconscious man toward the jailhouse. Something about Owen had caught her attention from the moment he'd arrived in Silver Creek 3 months ago. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence in his blue eyes, or how he never seemed to notice her limping gait when they crossed paths at church or the general store. Unlike the other cowboys who either pitied or ignored her, Owen treated her like any other woman. Miss Morrison. His deep voice startled her as he approached after handing off the troublemaker. Everything all right? You're looking a mite pale. Mabel quickly tucked the letter into her pocket. Just waiting for the commotion to settle before heading to the post office. Owen tipped his hat, revealing a shock of sandy hair. Mind if I walk with you? These streets aren't settling down anytime soon, with that cattle drive camped outside town. She hesitated, then nodded. His presence beside her was steady as they navigated the busy boardwalk. At 26, Owen had the weathered look of a man who'd spent his life under open skies. But there was gentleness in his sun-creased eyes. Heard there's to be a social at the church Saturday next, he said casually as they walked. Thought I might attend if the right person was planning to be there. Mabel's cheeks warmed. The ladies' auxiliary is serving pie. Mrs. Whitaker's apple is worth the price of admission alone. Ain't Mrs. Whitaker's pie I'm interested in, he said, his gaze direct but kind. Before she could respond, they reached the post office. Through the window, she could see Bernard Holcomb inside, his portly frame draped in an expensive suit despite the summer heat. The sight of him reminded her of the weight of responsibility she carried, a failing ranch, mounting debts, and no prospects. I should go, she murmured, suddenly conscious of how her left foot dragged slightly with each step. Thank you for the escort, Mr. Lattimer. Owen, he corrected, and I meant what I said about the social. He tipped his hat again and strode away, leaving Mabel with a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. That evening, as Mabel sat on the porch of her small ranch house, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold, she reread Holcomb's letter. The banker had given her 2 weeks to accept his proposal or face foreclosure. She'd known him since childhood, a widower 20 years her senior, with cold eyes and calculating hands that lingered too long whenever he helped her from the stagecoach. The thought of being his wife made her shudder. But what choice did she have? Riverbend's mortgage payments were 3 months overdue, and the summer drought had decimated what little remained of their cattle herd. Her father had built this place with his bare hands after her mother died, determined to give Mabel a legacy. She couldn't bear to lose it. A movement at the edge of the property caught her eye. A rider approached slowly, silhouetted against the dying light. She recognized Owen's broad-shouldered figure before she could make out his features. Evening, Miss Morrison, he called, dismounting with the fluid grace of a man born to the saddle. Hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, she replied, setting aside her mending. What brings you out this way? Owen removed his hat, revealing hair still damp from washing. Foreman at Double Circle asked me to check on the water level in the creek we share. Thought I'd stop by on my way back. He hesitated. Actually, that's not the whole truth. I wanted to see you. His directness took her by surprise. Most men in Silver Creek circled around their intentions like wary wolves, but Owen spoke plainly. "I'm not much for fancy talk, Miss Morrison. I've taken notice of you these past months. There's something about you, a strength that doesn't shout but stands firm all the same." Mabel gripped the arms of her chair. "Mr. Lattimer, I think you might be mistaking endurance for strength. Anyone can endure if they have no choice. Call me Owen, please." He leaned against the porch railing. "And no, I don't mistake the two. I've known plenty who break under burdens lighter than yours." His gaze dropped briefly to her leg before returning to her face, not with pity, but with something like admiration. "You don't know my burdens," she said softly. "I know enough. Town talks. Says you've been running this place single-handed since your pa passed. That takes grit." He gestured toward the struggling ranch. "I also know the droughts hit you hard. I've got some experience with irrigation systems from my time in California. Might be able to help if you'd allow it." Mabel stared at him, suspicious of charity, but desperate for solutions. "I can't pay you. Wasn't asking for payment." His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Just maybe save me a dance at that social, if your card isn't already full." She couldn't help but laugh. "Mr. Lattimer Owen, surely you've noticed I don't dance." "Everyone dances," he said simply. "Some just move to a different rhythm." After he left, promising to return the next day to look at her irrigation ditches, Mabel sat in the gathering darkness, turning his words over in her mind. There had been no condescension in his offer, no pity in his eyes when he'd mentioned dancing. For the first time in years, someone had seen beyond her limp to the woman beneath. But even as hope flickered to life within her, Bernard Holcomb's ultimatum cast its long shadow. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to decide between losing her home or chaining herself to a man she could never love. True to his word, Owen arrived early the next morning. Mabel watched from the kitchen window as he rode up, the rising sun gilding his profile. She'd been up since before dawn, baking biscuits and brewing coffee, telling herself it was simply proper hospitality and not an excuse to impress him. "Hope you're hungry," she said as he stepped onto the porch, removing his hat. "I might have made enough for 3 men your size." "Been up since 4 moving cattle," he replied with a grateful smile. "I could eat a whole steer, I reckon." They sat at the worn oak table her father had built, and Mabel found herself relaxing in Owen's presence. He ate with obvious appreciation, but didn't rush, telling her stories about his years working ranches from Texas to California. "What brought you to Montana?" she asked, pouring him more coffee. A shadow crossed his face. "Lost someone. Needed a fresh start." He didn't elaborate, and Mabel didn't press. They all carried their own sorrows in the West. After breakfast, they walked the property together. Owen examined the dried-up irrigation channels with a critical eye, occasionally kneeling to test the soil or measure the grade of the land. "Your pa had the right idea," he said finally. "But these channels are too shallow. Water just evaporates before it reaches the far pastures." He sketched a rough diagram in the dirt with a stick. "If we deepen them here and here, add some wooden troughs over the low spots, you could double your water efficiency." Mabel stared at the drawing, hope and doubt warring within her. That would take weeks of work. Not with help. Owen straightened, brushing dirt from his hands. "I've got Sundays off and evenings after my shift at Double Circle. There's that new fellow at the livery who owes me a favor, and I reckon Pastor Miller might rally some of the churchmen if we frame it as a community effort." "Why would you do this?" Mabel asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. Owen's expression grew serious. "Because it's right. Because this land deserves someone who loves it like you do." He hesitated. "And because I'd like a chance to know you better, Miss Morrison. No strings, no obligations. Just a chance." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Bernard Holcomb rode toward them on his sleek bay gelding, his expression souring as he spotted Owen. "Miss Morrison," he called, dismounting with considerably less grace than Owen had shown. "I was hoping to speak with you privately." "Mr. Holcomb?" Mabel nodded stiffly. "You remember Mr. Lattimer from the Double Circle?" The banker barely acknowledged Owen. "Ranch business, I'm afraid. Quite urgent." Owen looked to Mabel, clearly reluctant to leave her alone with Holcomb, but unwilling to overstep. "I should check those western channels before I head back. Take your time." With a pointed look that assured her he wouldn't go far, he strode away. "I see you found yourself a handyman," Holcomb said, once Owen was out of earshot, his tone dripping with condescension. "Charming, but I doubt Mr. Lattimer's irrigation expertise will solve your financial troubles." "I received your letter," Mabel said coldly. "And have you considered my proposal?" He stepped closer, his cologne cloying in the morning heat. "You must see it's the sensible solution, my dear. As my wife, you'd want for nothing. This ranch would thrive with proper investment. And if I refuse?" Holcomb's smile tightened. "Then I'm afraid the bank must protect its interests. Foreclosure proceedings would begin immediately." He glanced in the direction Owen had gone. "I wouldn't put much stock in the attentions of a drifting cowhand if I were you. Men like that move with the seasons." "Unlike you, whose interest is purely financial," Mabel retorted. His eyes hardened. "Financial, yes, but I also admire your resilience. You've managed remarkably well considering your limitations." His gaze lingered on her leg. Few men would be so generous in their assessment. Mabel felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. "I'll give you my answer at the end of the 2 weeks, as agreed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." After Holcomb departed, Mabel found Owen by the western fence line, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. "That man's got the personality of a rattlesnake," he muttered. "Pardon my bluntness." "No pardon needed for the truth," she replied. Then, making a decision, she added, "He's threatening foreclosure." Owen's expression darkened further. "Hence his urgent ranch business? He's offered a solution." She couldn't bring herself to say the word marriage. One that would keep River Bend in friendly hands. Understanding dawned in Owen's eyes. "There's nothing friendly about that man." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "How long do you have?" 2 weeks. He nodded, his gaze sweeping across the struggling ranch. "Then we've got 2 weeks to show you another way." Over the next few days, Owen was true to his word. After completing his duties at Double Circle, he'd ride to River Bend, working until dusk deepened into night. Together, they dug irrigation channels, repaired fences, and assessed the remaining cattle herd for the healthiest breeding stock. Word spread through Silver Creek, and to Mabel's astonishment, help began to arrive. Pastor Miller brought 3 men from the church. The new blacksmith offered to repair her rusted equipment for the cost of materials alone. Even Mrs. Whitaker from town appeared one afternoon with 2 meat pies and her strapping sons in tow, ready to work. "Community looks after its own," the older woman said simply when Mabel tried to express her gratitude. Only Bernard Holcomb and his allies at the bank watched with growing displeasure. Twice he rode out to River Bend, each time finding Mabel working alongside Owen and the others, her determination growing with each passing day. "This changes nothing," Holcomb reminded her during his second visit, voice low so others wouldn't hear. "Goodwill won't pay your mortgage. You have 4 days left to accept my offer." But something had changed in Mabel. Working side by side with Owen, seeing her father's land respond to their care, had awakened a resolve she'd forgotten she possessed. The night before the church social, Owen stayed late, helping Mabel calculate their progress. They sat at the kitchen table, lamp burning low, reviewing figures that still fell discouragingly short of what she needed to satisfy the bank. "We've made good headway," Owen said, trying to sound encouraging. "The new irrigation is already greening up the south pasture. Come fall, you could sell off 10 head and still maintain a breeding stock." "But that's months away." Mabel pushed the papers aside in frustration. "Holcomb wants his answer by Tuesday." Owen was quiet for a long moment. "There might be another way." He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "I've been saving, working ranch jobs since I was 16. Never had much reason to spend it. It's not enough to clear the mortgage, but it could buy you time." Mabel stared at him. "I can't take your savings." "Not giving them, investing in a partnership." He met her gaze steadily. "I believe in this land, in what you're doing here." "Why?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. "Why would you risk everything on a failing ranch and a—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "A what? A strong, capable woman who refuses to give up?" Owen leaned forward, his expression intense. "Mabel, do you know what I see when I look at you? Not a limp. I see someone who keeps moving forward when the path is hard. Someone who faces each day with courage, even when it would be easier to surrender." Tears pricked at Mabel's eyes. No one had ever spoken to her this way, as if her determination was something admirable rather than merely necessary. "The social is tomorrow," Owen said softly. "Come with me. Let the town see us together. It might not change Holcomb's mind, but it will show everyone that you have choices." She thought of the banker's smug certainty, of his assumption that no other man would want her, of the years she'd spent believing the same. "Yes," she said, decision crystallizing. "I'll go with you." The church social. The following evening transformed the austere wooden building into a warm haven of lantern light and laughter. Trestle tables groaned under the weight of pies, cakes, and savory dishes, while fiddle music spilled into the summer evening. Mabel stood outside, her heart pounding. She'd worn her best dress, a blue calico she'd carefully altered to hide its age, and arranged her hair in a style she'd seen in a magazine Mrs. Whitaker had lent her. Still, anxiety gnawed at her. It had been years since she'd attended a social, preferring to avoid the stares and whispers that inevitably followed her. "You look beautiful." Owen's voice came from behind her. He stood a few feet away, freshly shaven, and wearing a clean white shirt with his usual vest and denims. The simple sincerity in his voice made her blush. "I'm nervous," she admitted as he offered his arm. "Everyone will stare." "Let them." He smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Give them something worth staring at." Drawing a deep breath, she placed her hand on his arm and allowed him to escort her inside. The conversations dimmed momentarily as heads turned in their direction. Mabel felt the familiar weight of scrutiny, but Owen's steady presence beside her made it bearable. Pastor Miller approached first, his wife beside him. "Miss Morrison, what a pleasure to see you here. And Mr. Lattimer, I must thank you again for organizing the help at River Bend." Others followed, some genuinely welcoming, others merely curious. Mabel found herself engaged in conversations she would normally have avoided, buoyed by Owen's quiet support, and the realization that not everyone viewed her with pity or disdain. Bernard Holcomb arrived an hour into the evening, his calculating gaze immediately finding Mabel. He approached with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way, nodding curtly to Owen. "Miss Morrison, you're looking well." His eyes narrowed slightly as he noted her hand on Owen's arm. "I trust you've been considering our discussion. I'll expect your answer Tuesday, as agreed." "Mr. Holcomb?" Mabel's voice was steadier than she felt. "I've been considering many things lately, including options I hadn't previously entertained." Irritation flickered across the banker's face. "I'm sure Mr. Lattimer's assistance has been instructive, but sentiment won't save River Bend. Only sound financial decisions will." "You might be surprised what determination can accomplish," Owen interjected, his tone deceptively casual. "Mabel's made remarkable progress this week." "Mabel, is it?" Holcomb's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How familiar." "Well, I wouldn't want to intrude on your social engagement. Tuesday, Miss Morrison. I'll await your decision." With a curt bow, he moved away. The fiddle music changed to a lively reel, and couples began forming sets for a dance. Mabel tensed, her old insecurities rushing back. This was the part of socials she dreaded most, the reminder of what she couldn't do with the same ease as others. "Dance with me?" Owen said softly, extending his hand. Mabel shook her head. "I can't. Remember what I told you? Everyone dances. Some just move to a different rhythm." He didn't withdraw his hand. "Trust me." After a moment's hesitation, she placed her fingers in his. Owen led her not to the center of the floor where most couples gathered, but to a quieter corner where they would have space. "Follow my lead," he murmured. "No need to move quickly. We'll find our own pace." Gently, he guided her into a simplified version of the dance, adapting the steps to accommodate her limping gait. At first, Mabel was achingly aware of curious glances, but gradually, as Owen's confidence enveloped her, she began to relax into the movement. "See? Dancing," he said, with a smile that warmed her from within. They managed 3 dances before Mabel needed to rest, her leg aching from the unusual exertion, but her spirit lighter than it had been in years. As they stood by the refreshment table, Mrs. Whitaker approached, her expression warm. "You two make a handsome couple," she said, pressing a cup of punch into Mabel's hand. "Does my heart good to see young folks enjoying themselves?" From across the room, Mabel caught Bernard Holcomb watching them, his expression thunderous. The sight should have frightened her, but with Owen beside her and the memory of their dance still fresh, she found her fear replaced by determination. Tuesday would come, and with it, a choice. But for the first time, she believed she might have the strength to choose her own path. The days between the social and Tuesday passed in a blur of activity. Owen brought 2 more men from Double Circle to help complete the irrigation system, working from dawn until dusk. Mabel threw herself into the effort alongside them, ignoring the growing ache in her leg and the apprehension in her heart. By Monday evening, the transformation was visible. Water flowed through the newly deepened channels, already bringing hints of green to the parched pastures. The cattle looked healthier, grazing on the revived sections of land. It wasn't enough to save Riverbend overnight, but it offered a glimmer of hope, evidence that the ranch could thrive again, with proper care and time. Owen stayed late that night, helping Mabel prepare for her meeting with Holcomb the following day. They worked through her accounts at the kitchen table, looking for any advantage. "Even with your savings added to mine, we're still short," Mabel said, the reality weighing heavily upon her. "Holcomb knows it. What if we approach the bank's board of directors directly?" Owen suggested. "Holcomb's not the only decision-maker there. If we could show them the improvements, demonstrate that Riverbend is becoming profitable again." "They'd still see the past, due mortgage," Mabel interrupted gently. "And they'd see me." She gestured to her leg. "A woman alone, with a disability, trying to run a cattle ranch. They'd side with Holcomb in an instant." Owen's expression darkened. "There has to be another way." "Maybe there isn't." Mabel stared at the figures before her, despair threatening to overwhelm the determination she'd been nurturing. "Maybe I've been fooling myself, thinking I could keep Pa's dream alive on my own." "You're not on your own anymore." Owen reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Mabel, these past weeks working alongside you, I've never met anyone like you. Your strength, your kindness, your refusal to give up, it's changed something in me." She looked up, startled by the emotion in his voice. "I lost someone once," he continued. "My wife, Sarah. Childbirth fever took her and our baby 3 years ago in California. I've been drifting ever since, never staying in one place long enough to feel anything again. Until Silver Creek. Until you." Mabel's heart ached for his loss. "I'm so sorry, Owen. I'm not telling you this for sympathy." He squeezed her hand. "I'm telling you because meeting you woke something I thought was dead, made me want to stop running." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "There is another way, Mabel, one I hadn't dared consider until now." "What way?" "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them. Mabel stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I know it's sudden," Owen continued quickly. "I know we've only known each other a short while, but I also know what I feel. As a married couple, we could apply for a homestead claim north of here, add it to Riverbend. My savings would help with the mortgage. We could build something together, something stronger than either of us could create alone." "Owen," she whispered, her voice catching, "I can't let you sacrifice your future for my ranch." "It's not a sacrifice if it's what I want more than anything." He came around the table, kneeling beside her chair despite her protests. "This isn't about the ranch, Mabel. It's about you, about us. I think I've been falling in love with you since the first time I saw you in town, holding your head high despite the whispers, moving at your own pace in a world that tries to rush everyone along." Tears welled in Mabel's eyes. "People would talk. They'd say you married me out of pity." "Let them talk." Owen's gaze never wavered. "We'd know the truth." He took both her hands in his. "I'm not asking for an answer now. Just promise you'll consider it before you see Holcomb tomorrow." She nodded, unable to speak through the tangle of emotions in her throat. After Owen left, promising to return the next morning, Mabel sat alone in the quiet house, her thoughts churning. Marriage to Bernard Holcomb would save the ranch but condemn her to a life with a man who saw her as flawed, a business transaction and nothing more. Marriage to Owen. The thought sent warmth blooming through her chest. Owen, who danced with her at her own pace. Owen, who saw strength where others saw weakness. Owen, who might actually love her, limp and all. But was it fair to him? Would he eventually resent tying himself to a woman others pitied? Or was she finally being offered the chance at happiness she'd long ago stopped believing possible? Mabel slept fitfully, waking before dawn to prepare for her meeting with Holcomb. She bathed and dressed with care, choosing her most businesslike skirt and shirtwaist, and pinning her hair in a no-nonsense style. Whatever decision she made, she would face it with dignity. Owen arrived as promised, his expression betraying his anxiety despite his attempt at a confident smile. "You don't have to decide about my proposal yet," he assured her as they sat on the porch, waiting for the appointed hour. "Just don't give in to Holcomb before we've explored every option." At precisely 10 o'clock, Bernard Holcomb's expensive buggy appeared on the horizon. Mabel stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "Whatever happens," Owen said quietly, "remember, you have choices." Holcomb arrived with the smug certainty of a man who believed the outcome was predetermined. He nodded curtly to Owen, but addressed Mabel directly. "I trust you've reached a sensible decision, Miss Morrison." Mabel gestured toward the house. "Let's discuss this privately, Mr. Holcomb." Inside, she offered the banker a seat at the kitchen table. He refused, preferring to stand, perhaps to emphasize his position of power. "Well," he prompted, "I have other appointments in town." Mabel took a deep breath. "I've considered your proposal carefully, Mr. Holcomb. And you accept, naturally." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "A wise choice, given your circumstances. We can announce the engagement next Sunday, marry by month's end. I've already spoken with Pastor Miller about—" "I haven't given you my answer yet," Mabel interrupted, a newfound strength in her voice. Holcomb's smile faltered. "Surely you're not considering refusal. The consequences would be severe, Miss Morrison. Immediate foreclosure. You'd have nowhere to go, no one to turn to." His gaze flicked toward the window, where Owen's silhouette was visible on the porch. "Unless you believe the romantic notions of a drifting cowhand." "Owen has helped me see possibilities I'd forgotten existed," Mabel said carefully. "The ranch is improving. With more time, I could meet my obligations to the bank. Time is precisely what you don't have." Holcomb's voice hardened. "The board meets tomorrow. They'll approve foreclosure without hesitation. Unless I become your wife." "Precisely." He stepped closer, his cologne cloying in the small room. "I'm offering you security, respectability. Yes, there would be talk about your condition. But as Mrs. Holcomb, you'd be above such petty concerns." Mabel's skin crawled at his proximity, at the calculating gleam in his eyes. "Ann River Bend would become part of my holdings, naturally. I'd likely sell off the cattle, convert it to cropland, more profitable. My father's dream was unsustainable," Holcomb cut in impatiently. "You're a sensible woman, Mabel. Sentiment has no place in business." In that moment, everything became clear to Mabel. Holcomb didn't want her. He wanted River Bend. She was merely an inconvenient obstacle to be managed through matrimony. "I have your answer, Mr. Holcomb," she said, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I'm declining your proposal." The banker's face flushed with anger. "You'll regret this foolishness. By this time next week, you'll be homeless, penniless. No one in Silver Creek will take you in for fear of crossing me." "Perhaps," Mabel acknowledged, "but I'll still have my dignity and my freedom. Some things are worth more than security." "This is about Lattimer, isn't it?" Holcomb spat the name like a curse. "Don't delude yourself into thinking he sees you as anything more than a charity case. Men like him don't tie themselves to crippled women." The cruel words stung, but Mabel refused to show it. "I believe we're finished here, Mr. Holcomb. I'll expect formal notice from the bank regarding foreclosure proceedings." Fuming, the banker stormed out, brushing past Owen on the porch without acknowledgement. Mabel followed more slowly, her legs suddenly unsteady. Owen's concerned gaze met hers as Holcomb's buggy disappeared in a cloud of dust. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though tears threatened. I refused him. Relief washed over Owen's face, followed quickly by determination. Then we fight. Together. I meant what I said last night, Mabel. Every word. I know you did. She managed a tremulous smile. And I've been thinking about your proposal all night. He moved closer, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. And I need to know something first. Why me, Owen? Truly, there are plenty of women without my complications. Women who could give you children, who wouldn't make you the subject of town gossip. Owen's face softened. Mabel Morrison. Do you think I give a damn about town gossip? As for children, there are plenty who need homes. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. He took her hands in his. Why you? Because in a world full of people looking for the easy path, you've faced every hardship with courage. Because your smile, rare as it is, lights up something inside me I thought was extinguished. Because when I'm with you, I feel like I've finally found home after years of wandering. Tears spilled down Mabel's cheeks, but they were tears of a different kind of relief, of hope, of a joy she'd never expected to experience. I'd be honored to be your wife, Owen Lattimer, she whispered, not to save the ranch, but because I think I'm falling in love with you too. His kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a pledge of all that might lie ahead if they faced it together. They married 3 days later in Pastor Miller's study, a simple ceremony with Mrs. Whitaker and the double circle foreman as witnesses. News of their hasty wedding spread through Silver Creek like wildfire, accompanied by the expected whispers and speculation. Some said Owen had married Mabel for her land, forgetting that River Bend was on the brink of foreclosure. Others suggested more scandalous motivations. A few, like Mrs. Whitaker, simply smiled and said it was about time Mabel Morrison found happiness. The day after their wedding, Owen and Mabel traveled to the county seat to file for a homestead claim on the unclaimed land north of River Bend. As a married couple, they were entitled to 160 acres under the Homestead Act land that would join seamlessly with River Bend if they could save it. They also paid a visit to the regional bank, where Owen presented a bold proposal, refinancing River Bend's mortgage through them instead of Holcomb's bank in Silver Creek, using their combined savings as a down payment and the new homestead claim as additional collateral. It's a risk, the bank manager warned them. If the drought continues, you could lose everything, both properties. We understand the risk, Owen replied, his hand steady on Mabel's shoulder. But we believe in what we're building. To Mabel's astonishment, the bank agreed to their terms, with payments structured to give them time to recover from the drought. They rode back to Silver Creek with the precious mortgage papers tucked safely in Owen's saddlebag, hardly daring to believe their gamble had paid off. Bernard Holcomb's fury when he learned of their maneuver was a storm that rattled the windows of Silver Creek for days. He made veiled threats, attempted to dissuade the regional bank from honoring the agreement, and spread malicious rumors about Owen's character. But, with the legal documents signed and filed, there was little he could do beyond nursing his wounded pride. As summer yielded to autumn, River Bend began to thrive under their combined care. Owen's irrigation improvements transformed the parched landscape, while Mabel's knowledge of cattle breeding and local markets proved invaluable. They worked from sunrise to sunset, falling into bed exhausted but deeply content in their shared purpose. They built a small cabin on the homestead claim, establishing the residence required by law, though they spent most nights at the main house on River Bend. In time, they planned to combine the properties into a single, expanded ranch, Owen and Mabel's River Bend, a legacy they would build together. Not everything was easy. Mabel's leg pained her after long days of work, and Owen sometimes woke from nightmares about his lost family. There were arguments about cattle management, about finances, about 100 small things that couples learned to navigate together. But beneath it all ran a current of deep respect and growing love that weathered each challenge. The church social. The following summer marked a year since that fateful dance where Owen had first shown Mabel she could move to her own rhythm. This time, they attended as established members of the community, hard-working ranchers who had defied expectations and predictions of failure. As they entered the church, Mabel was conscious of the glances that still followed her limping gait, but they no longer held the power to wound her. Owen's steady presence beside her was shield enough against old hurts. Pastor Miller greeted them warmly, his wife exclaiming over the basket of fresh vegetables Mabel had brought from their kitchen garden. "The finest tomatoes I've seen this season," she declared, loud enough for nearby congregants to hear. "You two have worked miracles with that land." Bernard Holcomb stood across the room, his expression souring as he observed their warm reception. In the year since their confrontation, he had married a widow from the next county, a woman with considerable property, but, Mabel noted with a twinge of sympathy, very little joy in her eyes. "Shall we dance?" Owen murmured as the fiddle music began, offering his hand with the same gentle confidence he'd shown that first night. Mabel smiled, placing her hand in his without hesitation. "Always." They moved to the center of the floor this time, no longer seeking the shadows. Owen adapted his steps to her pace as naturally as breathing, and Mabel followed his lead with growing confidence. She was aware of curious glances, of whispers behind hands, but found she cared less with each passing moment. It was during their second dance that she first noticed the pointed looks and barely concealed snickers from a group of newer arrivals travelers passing through on their way to Helena, unfamiliar with Silver Creek and its inhabitants. "Look at her drag that leg," one woman whispered, not quietly enough. "And him, pretending it's a proper dance. How embarrassing." Her companion nodded. "Probably married her for her land. Why else would a man like that tie himself to a cripple?" The words reached Mabel like a physical blow, all the more painful for their echo of doubts she'd fought to silence within herself. She faltered, her rhythm broken. Owen felt her hesitation. "Mabel, what's wrong?" She shook her head, unable to speak past the sudden constriction in her throat. The music continued around them, but Mabel stood frozen, painfully aware of the stares, the whispers, the mockery she'd fooled herself into thinking she'd moved beyond. "I need air," she managed, pulling away and limping toward the door, her gait more pronounced under the weight of her distress. Outside in the deepening twilight, she gulped in the cool evening air, trying to steady her racing heart. Footsteps behind her announced Owen's arrival. "What happened in there?" he asked gently, not touching her, but remaining close, a solid presence at her side. "Nothing that hasn't happened 100 times before," she replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Just people being people." "I heard them," Owen admitted, his jaw tightening. "Those women were only saying what everyone thinks," Mabel interrupted. "What you must think sometimes, when my leg pains me and I slow you down, when people stare at us in town or make comments just loud enough to be heard. Is that what you believe?" Owen's voice was quiet but intense. "After everything we've built together? After this past year?" Mabel turned to face him, tears gathering despite her determination to hold them back. "I want to believe in us, in you, but sometimes the doubts creep in, and I wonder if someday you'll regret tying yourself to a woman who will always limp, who will always be the subject of whispers." Owen was silent for a long moment, his face solemn in the fading light. Then he held out his hand. "Come with me." "Where?" "Just trust me." Hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. Owen led her not back into the church, but around to the small cemetery beside it. In the gathering dusk, he stopped before the grave of her father, Jonathan Morrison, who had died the previous winter. "Your pa built River Bend from nothing," Owen said quietly. "Raised you alone after your mother died, taught you to be strong, to persevere." He turned to face her fully. "Do you think he would have wanted you to let the words of strangers diminish what you've become, what we've built together?" Fresh tears spilled down Mabel's cheeks. "No, he would have told me to hold my head high." "That's right." Owen took both her hands in his. "Mabel, when I look at you, I don't see a limp. I see the strongest woman I've ever known. I see the partner who works beside me from dawn till dusk without complaint. I see the wife who holds me when the nightmares come, who reminds me that the past doesn't dictate our future." The music from the church drifted out to them, a slow, sweet waltz. Owen drew her gently into his arms. "Dance with me," he whispered, "here, under the stars, with only your pa as witness." And they danced, there among the gravestones, moving to their own rhythm. Mabel's limp was pronounced after the long day, but Owen matched his steps to hers without hesitation. "I love you," he said softly as they swayed. "Every step, every day, exactly as you are. From the church doorway came the sound of voices. Mabel looked up to see several figures silhouetted against the light, the travelers who had mocked her, now watching their dance among the gravestones with expressions she couldn't read. For a moment, old insecurities threatened to overwhelm her again. Then Owen spoke, his voice carrying clearly in the evening stillness. "Then limp with me to forever, Mabel. Let them stare. Let them wonder. We know what we have." The simplicity of his declaration, the depth of acceptance in his words, broke something open inside her, a final barrier she hadn't realized she still held. She had been living with one foot in the past, still carrying the weight of years of judgment and whispers. But here, in Owen's arms, she could finally set that burden down. "Forever," she agreed, a smile blooming through her tears. "However we get there." The onlookers in the doorway slipped back into the church, but Mabel barely noticed their departure. She and Owen continued their dance under the emerging stars, their shadows merging into one as they moved in perfect harmony, not despite her limp, but with it, incorporating it into the unique rhythm that was theirs alone. As summer yielded to the golden hues of autumn, River Bend flourished under their combined care. The improved irrigation system Owen had designed transformed the once struggling pastures into verdant grazing land. Their cattle herd, carefully culled and bred by Mabel's knowledgeable eye, grew healthier and more valuable with each passing month. The homestead claim north of the original ranch proved to be excellent land for crops. They planted wheat and corn, adding diversity to their operation and protection against the vagaries of cattle prices. By winter, they had paid the first installment on their refinanced mortgage and still had savings set aside for emergencies. Word of their success spread beyond Silver Creek. Other ranchers came to study Owen's irrigation techniques. Mabel found herself consulted on matters of cattle breeding, her expertise respected in a way she'd never experienced before. Gradually, the whispers about her disability faded, replaced by admiration for what she and Owen were building together. Bernard Holcomb watched their progress with poorly concealed resentment. His own fortunes had begun to wane as other ranchers, inspired by Mabel and Owen's example, sought refinancing through the regional bank. By spring, rumors circulated that he might be forced to sell his holdings and relocate to Helena, where his wife's family had connections. "Can't say I'm sorry to see him go," Mrs. Whitaker remarked one Sunday after church. "That man brought nothing but misery to this town. You two, on the other hand," she beamed at Mabel and Owen, "you've brought hope, shown what's possible when people work together instead of stepping on each other's necks." As their second year of marriage approached, Mabel and Owen expanded their vision for the ranch. They added a second story to the main house, creating space for what they both hoped would someday be a family. Though Mabel had worried she might never be able to bear children due to the childhood illness that had left her with a limp, a visit to the doctor in Helena had reassured her that motherhood was indeed possible. "Might be harder on your body than most," the doctor had cautioned. "That hip will give you trouble, but plenty of women with worse ailments have healthy babies." The possibility filled Mabel with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Owen, when she shared the doctor's assessment, had simply held her close. "Whatever happens, whenever it happens, we'll face it together," he promised. "And if it doesn't happen that way, there are other paths to family." His unconditional acceptance, his willingness to embrace whatever future unfolded, deepened Mabel's love for him in ways she hadn't thought possible. The uncertain girl who had once believed herself unworthy of such devotion was fading, replaced by a woman who understood her own value and strength. It was at the midsummer church social, 2 years after their first dance together, that Mabel finally felt the last of her old insecurities fall away. She and Owen arrived late, having stayed at the ranch to help a heifer through a difficult first calving. They entered the church hall still wearing their work clothes, apologizing for their appearance. "Nonsense," Pastor Miller greeted them warmly. "Bringing new life into the world is God's work. We're just glad you made it." The social was in full swing, the music lively, the mood festive. Mabel spotted several newcomers to Silver Creek among the crowd, a young doctor and his wife who had recently established a practice in town, a school teacher from back east, and a family who had purchased land south of River Bend. As Owen went to fetch them both a cup of punch, Mabel found herself approached by the doctor's wife, a petite woman with kind eyes. "Mrs. Lattimer?" she inquired. "I'm Clara Wilson. My husband and I just moved here last month." "Welcome to Silver Creek," Mabel replied warmly. "How are you finding it?" "Friendlier than I expected," Clara admitted. "Though I've heard so many stories about you and your husband, I feel as if I know you already." Mabel tensed slightly, wondering what kind of stories had reached the newcomer's ears. "Oh? What have you heard?" Clara's smile was genuine. "That you saved your family ranch against impossible odds. That you and your husband have the most successful cattle operation in the county. That you're the person to consult about breeding stock." She hesitated, then added more softly, "And that you overcame significant hardship to build it all." Mabel waited for the familiar sting that usually accompanied such observations, but to her surprise, it didn't come. Instead, she felt a quiet pride. "The ranch is a partnership. Owen and I each bring different strengths." "That's what makes a good marriage," Clara nodded. "My Edward and I are the same. He has the medical knowledge, but I manage the practice. Together, we're stronger than either of us alone." She glanced across the room to where Owen was returning with their drinks. "You're fortunate to have found a true partner." "I know," Mabel agreed, watching her husband navigate through the crowded room, his tall figure unmistakable. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, nodding and smiling at greetings, but keeping his course steady toward her, as he had from the beginning. The fiddle music shifted to a waltz, and couples began to move onto the dance floor. Owen handed Mabel her punch, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she loved. "Dance with me?" he asked, as he always did, without a trace of hesitation or doubt. Clara Wilson watched them with curiosity. "You dance, Mrs. Lattimer? I thought—" She stopped abruptly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Forgive me, that was presumptuous." But Mabel smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face. "Everyone dances, Mrs. Wilson. Some just move to a different rhythm." She placed her hand in Owen's, allowing him to lead her onto the floor. They moved together with the practiced ease of a couple who had learned each other's cadence, her limp incorporated into their unique pattern of steps. From across the room, Mabel caught sight of Bernard Holcomb, making a rare appearance before his rumored departure from Silver Creek. His gaze followed her and Owen, his expression unreadable. But whatever judgment or resentment he harbored no longer had the power to touch her. As they swayed to the music, Owen bent his head close to hers. "Happy?" he murmured. Mabel looked up at him, this man who had seen her strength when others saw only weakness, who had chosen to walk beside her at her pace rather than rushing ahead or leaving her behind. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. Then, with a smile that held both joy and anticipation, she added, "And I have news. The doctor and Helena confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby in the winter." Owen's steps faltered. The only time she'd ever seen him lose his perfect rhythm. His eyes widened, filling with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. "A baby? You're certain?" She nodded, her own eyes brimming with happy tears. "Certain. Dr. Wilson confirmed it this morning." For a moment, Owen seemed unable to speak. Then, in one fluid motion, he lifted her off her feet in a gentle embrace, heedless of the startled glances around them. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." He set her carefully back on her feet, mindful as always of her comfort, but kept his arms around her. The music continued around them, but they stood still in their own private moment of joy. "I was afraid to hope," Mabel admitted softly. "After what the doctor said about the difficulties." "We'll face them together," Owen promised, his hand moving protectively to her still flat stomach. "Whatever comes, the three of us. The three of us." The words resonated within Mabel, a fulfillment of dreams she'd once believed beyond her reach. She thought of the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate young woman facing foreclosure to a confident ranch owner expecting her first child. From a woman who hid from social gatherings to avoid the stares at her limping gait, to one who danced without shame before the entire town. The transformation hadn't erased her limp. She would always move with that distinctive rhythm, would always face challenges others didn't. But Owen had shown her that such differences needn't define her life's boundaries. As the waltz ended, Owen bent to kiss her softly, unconcerned with the public display. "I love you, Mabel Lattimer," he murmured. "Every step, every day, exactly as you are." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full, "for showing me how to limp with pride, for walking beside me at my pace, for helping me find my own way to forever." Around them, the social continued, the rhythms of community life flowing on. But within their embrace lay a different cadence, the unique beat of two hearts that had found each other against all odds, and a third tiny heart just beginning its journey. Mabel thought of all the paths that had brought her to this moment, the difficult ones she'd traveled alone, and the ones she and Owen had forged together. Each step, limping or not, had been necessary to reach this place of belonging. She placed her hand over Owen's where it rested against her stomach, feeling the promise of their future beneath their joined fingers. They would face challenges ahead, the difficulties of her pregnancy, the never-ending work of the ranch, the inevitable whispers that would follow their child as the son or daughter of the limping woman. But they would face it all together, moving forward at their own pace, in their own rhythm. Limping, perhaps, but limping proudly toward forever. Winter came early that year, blanketing Riverbend in snow before November's end. The newly expanded main house stood warm and secure against the Montana cold, smoke curling from the chimney into the crystalline air. Inside, Owen added another log to the fire, watching the flames leap higher as Mabel sat in the rocking chair he'd crafted for her, her hands resting on her swollen belly. The baby was due any day now. Dr. Wilson had been out to check on her the previous afternoon, pronouncing mother and child healthy, but warning that the birth might be challenging due to Mabel's hip. Owen had nodded gravely, his concern evident in the new lines around his eyes, but Mabel had simply smiled. "We've faced worse," she'd reminded him after the doctor left, "and gained more than we ever dreamed possible." Now, as the winter light faded outside their windows, Owen knelt beside her chair. "How are you feeling?" "Ready," she replied, taking his hand and placing it where their child kicked vigorously. "And a little frightened," she admitted, "but mostly grateful. For this life we've built. For you." Owen's expression softened as he felt the movement beneath his palm. "I never thought I'd know this feeling again," he said quietly. "After Sarah and our baby died, I closed myself off from the possibility. Couldn't bear the thought of that kind of loss again." Mabel covered his hand with hers. They rarely spoke of his first wife, but the approaching birth had brought memories to the surface for both of them. Owen's of his lost family, Mabel's of the childhood illness that had nearly claimed her life and had left her with a permanent reminder of its passage. "I understand fear," she said softly. "I spent years afraid of people's judgment, of being alone forever, of losing everything I loved. But you taught me that fear doesn't have to dictate our choices." Owen nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright in the firelight. "Just promise me you'll fight, Mabel, whatever happens when the time comes. Fight to stay with us." She leaned forward to kiss him gently. "With everything I have," she promised. "We've come too far together for me to leave you now." The labor began that night, as the season's first blizzard howled around their snug home. Owen rode through the driving snow to fetch Dr. Wilson and his wife, returning with them just as Mabel's pains intensified. The hours that followed tested every ounce of Mabel's strength and Owen's faith. Her damaged hip made the birth more difficult, prolonging her labor and increasing her pain. Dawn broke, pale and cold, with Mabel exhausted but still fighting. Owen by her side, refusing to leave even when Dr. Wilson suggested it might be best. "I promise to stay with her through everything," he said simply. "I won't break that promise now." As morning light filled the bedroom, Mabel gathered her remaining strength for a final push, gripping Owen's hand with surprising force. "That's it," Dr. Wilson encouraged. "I can see the head. One more, Mrs. Lattimer." With a cry that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, Mabel brought their child into the world, a daughter, red-faced and indignant, her lusty cries filling the room. "A girl," Owen whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as the doctor placed the squalling infant on Mabel's chest. "We have a daughter." Mabel gazed down at the tiny, perfect face, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took her remaining breath away. "Sarah," she said softly, "after your first wife, Sarah Grace Lattimer." Owen's eyes widened, then filled with tears anew. "Are you certain?" Mabel nodded, cradling their daughter close. "She was part of your journey to me, and grace has brought us here, through all the hardships. It's right that her name should honor both." As Dr. Wilson tended to Mabel and Mrs. Wilson helped clean and swaddle little Sarah, Owen sat beside the bed, holding his wife's hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "You did it," he murmured. "You fought." "We did it," Mabel corrected, her exhausted face radiant despite the ordeal. "Together. The way we do everything." The news of Sarah Grace Lattimer's birth spread through Silver Creek with the speed that only small-town tidings can travel. Despite the continuing snow, visitors braved the weather to bring gifts and congratulations to Riverbend Mrs. Whitaker with a handmade quilt, Pastor Miller with a blessing, neighboring ranchers with practical offerings of food and assistance with the livestock, while Owen was occupied with his new family. Even Bernard Holcomb, still in Silver Creek, despite rumors of his imminent departure, sent a silver rattle with a brief note of congratulations. Mabel suspected it was more his wife's doing than his own, but accepted the gift graciously all the same. As winter deepened, the little family settled into new rhythms. Mabel recovered slowly from the difficult birth, her limp more pronounced for a time, but gradually returning to its familiar pattern. Sarah thrived, growing stronger each day, her eyes eventually settling into the same clear blue as her father's. On a crisp January morning, with the world outside still wrapped in snow, Owen carried Sarah in a sling against his chest as he helped Mabel bundle up for her first real walk since the birth. "Are you sure you're ready?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Dr. Wilson said not to rush your recovery." "I'm sure," Mabel replied with determination. "I need to feel the sun on my face, see more than these four walls, no matter how lovely they are." Together, they stepped out onto the porch of their home. The winter landscape stretched before them, Riverbend transformed into a wonderland of white, the expanded boundaries of their land reaching toward the distant mountains. Mabel took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. Her steps were slower than before, her limp more noticeable as she carefully navigated the cleared path Owen had made for her. But, with her husband beside her, their daughter nestled against his heart, she felt no shame in her uneven gait. They walked to the edge of the homestead, where the new land they had claimed joined with the original boundaries of Riverbend. From this vantage point, they could see the entire ranch, the improved cattle barns, the fields waiting beneath the snow for spring planting, the creek that gave the ranch its name, now frozen but still beautiful in the winter light. "I remember standing here with my father when I was a girl," Mabel said softly. "He told me that someday all this would be mine to care for. I don't think he ever imagined how it would grow, what it would become." Owen shifted Sarah in her sling, the baby blinking sleepily in the bright winter sunlight. "What do you think he'd say if he could see it now?" Mabel smiled, remembering her father's weathered face, his hands rough from years of ranch work but gentle when they held hers. "He'd say we'd done well, that we'd honored his dream and made it our own." She reached out to touch Sarah's downy head. "And he'd be so proud to see his granddaughter, the next generation of Riverbend." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun sparkle on the snow-covered land. Then Owen spoke, his voice thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if Bernard Holcomb hadn't threatened foreclosure? If we hadn't been forced to fight for this place?" "Sometimes," Mabel admitted. "But then I remember that without that crisis you might never have offered to help. We might have continued just nodding to each other in town, never knowing what we could build together." Owen nodded, his gaze traveling from their home to the distant boundaries of their expanded ranch. "Life's funny that way. The hardest challenges often lead to the greatest gifts." He looked down at their daughter, then at Mabel. "I came to Montana running from loss, found a home instead, found you. And I spent years believing my limp defined me," Mabel said, "limiting what I thought possible." She gestured toward their thriving ranch, then to Sarah. "I couldn't have imagined this future." A slight breeze stirred the snow around their feet as they turned to walk back toward the house. Mabel's pace was slow, each step careful on the icy path, her limp a visible reminder of all she had overcome. Owen matched his stride to hers without hesitation, as he always had, as he always would. Sarah slept peacefully against his chest, content in the secure knowledge of being loved. "Then limp with me to forever," Owen said softly, echoing the words he'd spoken that night among the gravestones, words that had broken through the last of Mabel's defenses and shown her a new way to see herself. Mabel smiled up at him, her heart full. "Forever," she agreed, one step at a time. Together, they made their way home across the snow-covered land they'd fought for, and won not just the physical boundaries of Riverbend Ranch, but the right to define their own path, to move at their own rhythm, to build a life and legacy that honored both their struggles and their triumphs. And if Mabel's steps left an uneven pattern in the snow behind them, it was a pattern to be proud of, the unique imprint of a journey taken with courage, with love, and with the unshakable belief that the most beautiful paths to forever are rarely the smoothest.